and I'm going to welcome you all here. So welcome to this webinar. This is the first and only panel actually of the Sober Weekender. But the panel this evening is going to talk about the upsides of changing your drinking. We've got an awesome panel with us this evening. I don't actually know if we all see everybody in the same order, so I'm hoping you guys will wave. So we've got Scott Pignard, who's the head coach at This Naked Mind. And so I know many of you have done some of the This Naked Mind programs and read the book by Annie Grace. Scott is the head coach for that. We've got James Morris, who's an academic in this area, but also a moderate drinker. So for those of you moderating, James is going to tell us how it's done. We have Millie Gooch, who some of you will know as Sober Girl Society. And we have Harriet Whaley-Cohen, who is a coach. And Harriet, tell us which milestone you're on at the minute of alcohol-free.
Yes, 17 years and 7 months and 3 days.
So she beats all of us. And then also on the webinar is Drew Yeager, who you'd have seen in bed with me this morning.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, with our breakfast in bed. And as you know, Drew is also a moderate drinker, but I'm sure he will be chipping in this evening. So we're going to run this webinar a bit like we've done already this morning. And for those of you that have been on them, so do ask questions in the sidebar. We'll be keeping an eye on them. You see whose face you can't see on there is in the back room, and he will be answering any questions that he can for links and other things that might be easy for him to access. But we want you to ask this extraordinary panel of here in front of us today all of the questions that you want, and I will be asking them those. But I'm going to kick off, and you can tell us a little bit more about yourself with this question. But first of all, thinking back, and this might be quite a way back for you particularly, Harriet, what motivated you to want to change your drinking in the first place? Scott, do you want to make a start?
I was wondering who was going to go first. Am I going to be it? It's me. So, you know, like a lot of people, I struggled for a long time. You know, I spent about probably 6 or 7 years really with that idea in the back of my head, trying to cram it down and just be okay. But where it really finally came to a head for me was when I was seeing the effects it was having on my relationships, particularly with my wife. And at the time I had a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old. No, that's not true. A 2-year-old and a 6-year-old. And it's hard to describe, but I just knew at one point that I wasn't as present for them. You know, every single night I was there, I was around, and sure, I was fun and joking, but you know, I was not fully present. And I think it was when I finally realized that and like saw it very clearly in front of me that I said, you know, now's the time. And that kicked off a several-year journey for me of trying to find a way to make it happen. And I tried all different types of stuff. I tried AA, I tried smart recovery, I tried just willpowering my way through it, and I went through all the ups and downs that a lot of us are familiar with, until I actually quit drinking with This Naked Mind, the book. So when I found that, it was a game changer for me, and at that point I started having a little bit of hope that I could actually get going in that direction. And then, yeah, so you said say a little bit about myself. After that, I started coaching people, and then I met Annie Grace, and then I started working for her. I've been doing that for about 2 years now.
I'm interested that you went through lots of different journeys to change your drinking. Do you think each time you got stronger or more confident? Because that's a lot of false starts, but people often feel very upset about their false starts. But were they a waste of time?
I would not say so. I will say though, which, you know, and this is something that I'm sure all of us see all the time, is that I really beat the hell out of myself with each one of those false starts. So yes, there were lessons that I took away from it. There was stuff, I really enjoy reading about the science of addiction and alcohol use disorder and how that affects us. And I love psychology. And so I learned a lot through all these various methods. But it came with a heaping dose of guilt for me. So it was kind of a mixed bag. Would I say they weren't worth it? Absolutely not. That was a lot of negatives, but they were totally worth it. And you know, it was good, and I did gain. And I think that's one of the things is that, you know, you get excited about a methodology or about this possibility of being alcohol free, and you can get a few days strung together, you know, and each one of those times I did that. And that was something, you know, that even if the method wasn't the right method for me, no one could take away from me. So yeah, it was worth it. I grabbed some. I also got some guilt, but it all kind of led to eventually a place where I was ready to let it go.
And Harriet, what about that for you? Because that must seem quite a long time ago now, and you were a far younger version of yourself 17 years ago.
I know. The blink of an eye, though. It goes fast.
Were you the party girl?
No, I wasn't. I was very, very briefly, but that was really just because that was the only acceptable place to drink and to use drugs the way I was doing it. That was really the delivery method rather than the enjoyable piece. Not that any of it was enjoyable, to be honest. I drank and took drugs to get away from the pain of being sober. I couldn't stand being in my own head. I couldn't stand how I felt about myself. And I wanted the critical voice in my head to shut up. Sorry, I was about to swear. Anyhow, I managed not to swear, so that's good. That's what being sober a long time gives you. You can moderate your swearing when you want to. And for me, it was very much about I was just absolutely desperate. I was completely broken inside, and I'd run out many years before, which might sound odd because I was only 26 at the time, but I had fully run out of the idea that getting out of it, numbing out, checking out, whatever you want to call it, was a good solution. It was never a problem. It was always my solution, and then my solution stopped working, and then it completely tore me to pieces, even worse. And then I needed to find a new solution. And here I am now. And as you know, I remember right at the beginning when I created some workshops for Club Soda right at the beginning, and we used to, you know, have a lot of fun on those evenings and afternoons. But I'm a coach, a women's leadership coach, and I do an awful lot of public speaking, although it's all online at the moment. But now here I am, all these years down the line, and I get to inspire and empower people to feel really good about themselves, and to help their inner critic to be quiet and to manage their emotions in a way that means they don't hurt themselves or anybody else. And I don't mind sharing that I was absolutely swear word furious this morning about something that I don't need to share what it was, but I was really unsettled and I was really cross, and I didn't do anything to hurt myself, and I didn't do anything to hurt anyone else. And what I did was I reached out and I asked for help from a few girlfriends, and one of them eventually picked up the phone, and we had a lovely chat, and by the end I was laughing, and it was all fine. And then when I felt a bit low this afternoon, I did some really angry laundry folding, and now not only do I not feel angry, my laundry's all folded. So there you go.
I think we'd like you all around our house when you're angry to fold our laundry. That would be awesome.
I tell you, if you pay for my taxi fare, I'll be there like a shot.
So Millie, you're in your late 20s, aren't you?
I am. So actually,
you're not far off the age Harriet was. Tell me a bit about your change and what was the motivation?
Yeah, so I was actually 26 when I stopped drinking. So I'm 28 now. So it was like 2 and nearly a bit years ago. My drinking was kind of, it was very all or nothing drinking. So I kind of started drinking when I went to university, and I kind of literally went from never really like learning how to drink to just getting like blackout drunk 3-4 nights a week. So I really kind of got myself into this cycle of binge drinking and blackout drinking, which started to have a really bad toll on my mental health. So I became very anxious, very depressed, and I kind of got myself into this like cycle of, oh, actually I feel a bit anxious, I think I need to drink, go out, get really drunk, blackout, not remember my night. I'd wake up the next morning, I'd be so anxious, and then I would just do it all again. And I got into this like real cycle, and I kind of did that since I left university for a good 8 years. And then when I got to 26, it got to the point where my self-esteem was on the floor. I just hated myself. I just didn't like enjoy life anymore. And then I was like, I need to do something drastic, and I don't know what it was. And I actually read Catherine Gray's book, The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober, and everything she said, I was like, that's me. And I just read so much, and I was like, maybe this big change is actually me changing my relationship with alcohol, giving up drinking. So that day I was like, I'm just going to give it a go. And then 2.5 years later, I'm still not drunk.
But Millie, I know this about you, which is that you didn't really drink at university before you went to university. That was the time that you started drinking. Was that like, was university a pressure, or was it that that change in lifestyle was the trigger for you?
Yeah, so before university, I used to do a lot of competitive dancing. So like every weekend I was training. So when my friends were like 14 and getting drunk at the park, I wasn't, I was training. So university was my first experience of drinking. And so I was never really, not taught to drink, but like it was literally, okay, you come here and you get as drunk as humanly possible. There isn't like, you come here and, you know, you have a few glasses of wine. I'd gone from drinking nothing to drinking like triple vodka Red Bulls for £1.50 in Oceania. So I'd never really like learned. And I always say sometimes I wasn't even that drunk for periods of time, because I just went from stone cold sober to absolutely blackout. So it was a turning point for me. And the problem was, when I went to university, I didn't have a lot of money. So I worked in 3 bars and, you know, the kind of culture there was just to drink, and all the bar staff were drunk because it was this like fun party atmosphere. So that was my first experience of drinking, was university binge drinking. And I just carried those habits with me into adult life.
So James, what came first for you, the study around alcohol or reducing your drinking, or was it just sort of this serendipity that you ended up doing both?
No, definitely the changing my drinking. I mean, I was pretty young when I went through the first kind of major change, which was actually in my second year at university as an undergraduate. So, yeah, I was trying to think how old I was, about 21, I think, then. And yeah, I mean, a lot of what people have said already I can relate to in a lot of ways, but certainly that really drinking to get drunk was the problem for me. I actually started drinking at about 14 in parks, drinking white cider, and I was a bit of I think people find it quite hard to believe, a kind of a bit of a tearaway kid, and I was always in trouble, and yeah, I'd experimented with lots of drugs and drinking, but alcohol was always my favourite. But I'd still always managed to kind of pass my exams, etc. But by the time I got to university, it was kind of like, as Millie described, you know, this cycle of just recovering and then just wanting to get back on it to partly kind of dull the feelings of anxiety. And I really remember actually having these quite serious anxiety attacks and never actually linking them with my drinking. I just remember, you know, just thinking, God, why am I so anxious? Well, a drink will obviously calm me down, but it was always lots rather than just one. But then when I did stop, as I said, in my second year, those anxiety attacks disappeared pretty much straight away. Yeah, the actual wake-up call was kind of when physical health effects started to kick in. So I developed quite a high tolerance, so I could drink huge amounts and not feel any effect. But of course, it was the effect that I was pursuing, so it would take more and more to get that effect until it was actually having a toll in terms of like gastritis and other unpleasant symptoms. But even though I'd done a whole load of stupid stuff and yeah, and the anxiety and all that kind of stuff, it wasn't until the actual very physical and painful effects kicked in that was a wake-up call.
That's really interesting. And I think I might come back to that anxiety point in a minute. But what's interesting, Scott, is people are saying that what was a turning point for you? Was it a book or group? And I think the question's quite telling, because actually people often want to know, what's the one thing that worked for you? And it probably may not be one thing. It wasn't ever just one thing that worked for me. But sometimes it's the one thing that you do that manages to stick or that changes your mindset. So can you maybe just touch on that point a little bit more, Scott?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, like I mentioned, I tried a lot of different things. You know, the time that it worked was when I read This Naked Mind, the book. But I don't know if I had read This Naked Mind, the book, before I tried all of those other things, if it would have had the same effect. You know, and I see this all the time in our programs too. You know, when people go and they have, you know, successive attempts, right? And maybe they're one right after the other. Many times when things finally click, when they finally start getting some alcohol-free time under their belt, it's because of all of that other experience, right? It's because of all of the other ups and downs. So you're totally correct with that, Laura. Like, that is 100% the case, that, like, yes, the book was a thing that made me turn the corner, but I had years of trying over and over. And one thing that I like to tell people is that it's a journey, not like a jump off point, right? So every time we try something, we're making some sort of progress. And so I really shy away from talking about, you know, failure or talking about, you know, falling off the wagon or relapse. Like, I don't use any of that language. The language that I use to talk about this stuff is I call everything a data point, right? So let's say you're 10 days alcohol free, you find yourself drinking, that's data, right? What happened there, right? What were the triggers? And I think it was through all of these attempts that I was able to develop that mindset that really started to shift for me into a way of living alcohol-free. I wish it was as easy as a magic bullet, you know, as like one thing that someone could do and then it just makes the change. But for a lot of us, it is the journey.
You're right. I always talk about change your drinking not being linear, and that it may be that you do sprints of trying to moderate and then alcohol-free. And to me, it doesn't matter which way you're going. At least you're trying something and picking up again and learning.
Yes.
One of the things that we're really keen on in Club Soda is being able to understand the benefits of changing and be able to see some of those quite quickly. People often try and talk about, particularly weight loss. Everyone hopes that we'll suddenly, after a month of not drinking, become a size 10 and be fit. It doesn't quite work like that. But even if you've just taken a week off, you can begin to see some benefits. What were some of the first things that you saw? Harriet, for you, what were some of the first things that you felt this is beginning to work?
I think probably the biggest thing was that I could start to think clearly again, because I wasn't hungover, even if I hadn't slept that brilliantly, because that's one of the things people assume they're going to sleep well. And it took me a long time to not have interrupted sleep. However, I could think clearly the next day, which meant that I could show up well for my job. I could be productive at work. I would not get quite so stressed so easily. And I started to notice with clarity some other areas of life as well. Just things like, as well, I could work out and feel better. All those sorts of things. And I could just start to make better choices. I do think that for me, and this, I'm just literally speaking for myself, because alcohol and drugs were my solution to how I felt inside, when they were taken away but I didn't yet have another solution, emotionally was an absolute roller coaster. So there were times when it was like the highs were really high, and then there was anxiety, and I started, you know, the first time I ever had full-blown panic attacks was in my first month of sobriety. And I'm not saying that to scare people, it's just that I started to discover all the reasons why I'd been drinking in the first place, right? Because I'd forgotten them, because it had been really all my adult life. So I'd had to learn to deal with all of that. So it's like, yay, I've got my feelings back. Ooh, don't know if I like this. So then, but that was actually a catalyst for learning new ways to deal with things. And the clear thinking from not being hungover was fantastic, I have to say. And that really, really helped with all of that. So it meant that the process was perhaps a bit more accelerated, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So
Can I
James,
just ask a question, Harriet? In
Yeah.
in those kind of early months where you were beginning to experience those difficult emotions, those big emotions that you hadn't been pushing away before, were there moments where you thought, stuff this, I'm just going to go back to drinking because it's easier?
No, there was one moment, and I remember it very, very clearly. I was less than a week sober, I had a handful of days sober. I don't remember exactly how many. And I had a really strong craving. And I remember walking out of the tube station on the way to my flat after work. And I called one of the other sober women I'd met. And I said, I'm really frightened. And I think that if I start drinking again, I may never get whatever it was, 4 days, 6 days, ever again in a row. And at that point, I was like, it's easier to go forward because I can't bear the thought, because I'd had such a emotional, spiritual rock bottom that I was like, you know what, whatever I need to get through, I'll just get through it. And remarkably, here I am now. Yeah.
So James, you talked about the fact that you began to feel the health impacts of drinking too much. Did they clear up quite quickly, or did some of that take a while?
Yeah, the impact for me, I mean, as I think the real motivator was when I really had the symptoms. I won't go into details of gastritis, but alcohol kind of dissolves your stomach lining, which means your kind of stomach can bleed, and that comes out in a sort of visible place. And that was really, when I first was aware of that, that was really the motivator. But before I actually stopped in my second year, I'd gone through periods of that sort of those symptoms coming up and then trying to calm down a bit with sort of varying degrees of success and failure. But yeah, once I was kind of onto that non-drinking stretch that I did through pretty much all of my 20s, that kind of stopped straight away. And then in turn, I kind of noticed the other things, including the anxiety. But I think that, the thing that I'd never planned to necessarily give up drinking, the thing that what really happened to me was how difficult I found it, because of my social network had been so built up around people who liked drinking like I did. And I think within that group, I was often kind of revered as the most enthusiastic or kind of committed binge drinker. And so the reaction that when I stopped drinking was literally of some people just to stop talking to me completely. And I think that gave me a sense of motivation, because I just felt that was so unfair and so wrong that there was no way that I was going to not do it because of that. But also I did realise that there was a degree of psychological dependency, because I did have a lot of cravings for maybe 3, probably even 6 months. I would regularly think, my God, I really just want to go back to drinking. But that was definitely because I think my drinking was motivated by underlying psychological problems, which I'm happy to talk about more if of interest perhaps later. But I think why I'm a moderate drinker now versus something that would never have been possible before, was that there was a lot of issues that I kind of had from my childhood that gave me this very kind of angry, rebellious, negative energy, I think. And alcohol felt at the time a really good way to channel that. It allowed me just to kind of, kind of self-destruct, but in a way that actually felt sort of kind of cathartic in a way at the time. But obviously, I think, as Harriet said earlier, there was a point where that stops working for you, particularly when you're kind of bleeding from the inside.
Millie, you talked about anxiety as well, and some of those mental health issues. Did that get better a lot quicker?
Yeah, I kind of echo what Harriet said, actually. For me, there was kind of like an initial spike in good mental health, because actually just physically taking the alcohol away meant that I wasn't in this like constant cycle and always like worrying, what did I do last night? So that was like an initial thing. But then actually improving my mental health over time has like taken a while. It's not like an immediate, you give up drinking, you feel amazing and all your anxiety disappears. So like for anyone who doesn't feel like that, don't be disheartened, because for me it's been a really gradual thing to get to a point where I feel like I'm really emotionally healthy. And I think as well, there's like a bit of a pressure that kind of good mental health is like being happy all the time, and it's not. It's like actually being able to process and deal with your feelings in like a healthier way rather than drinking. At least that's what it's sort of like turned into me. But I think like immediately I felt like I had more energy, and that wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go out and do a triathlon, but I just like wasn't lethargic getting out of bed in the morning. Like I'd go to work and I wasn't like, oh God, I really don't want to be here. I actually had like a bit more enthusiasm for life almost immediately.
You've also given up quite early in your career. Do you think it's helped your career that you've got this clarity and energy?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even just like little things like being able to go to like work parties and actually like represent myself as well, rather than people being like, oh, that. I think people take me a bit more seriously at work because they think, oh, like she means business. So yeah, I think it has helped. And like I always show up, I'm always like on time, I'm like never hungover, I'm always like performing really well. So that has, yeah, really helped.
And Scott, I'd be really interested from what you see within the This Naked Mind community as well, which is that often we might actually suffer some withdrawal symptoms because we might not notice them as that, but actually I slept I was very tired for the first 3 months and very thirsty. That's a withdrawal symptom. So it might be that you see some of those things that you think, oh my God, being sober isn't working. I better start drinking again, which some people do. How do you see that? And then how was that for you as well, that first period? And what things did you notice?
So yeah, by far the biggest question I get in any of our programs is, when does sleep go back to normal? So many people, and I try to make it very clear that even when I talk about this stuff, there's no guarantee. You know, you've probably heard of this when like med students read about a certain disease and then they start thinking they're having it because it's like in their head. So I'm always careful when I talk about this stuff, because it is entirely possible that people go through this and have very mild or not very noticeable symptoms. But hands down, the number one question I get is about sleep. So sleep is a big one. Another one that I get is exactly what Harriet was talking about, which is, how do I deal with these emotions, right? And part of it is some mood swing stuff that is, you know, just based on the process of recovery, but also getting poor sleep. But the rest of it is trying to address these things without that, what we thought was our tool next to us, right? So those are two of the biggies. Personally, sleep for me, it was about 2 weeks, and it was really, really rough. I was very tired, but there was an interesting sort of flip side to all of this. And like, one of the things I noticed right away was how much time I had. I was shocked, absolutely shocked at the number of hours in the day that I was not using before. And that to me was one of the, I remember it was like toward the end of the first week, I said something to my wife. I said something along the lines of like, I feel like I've lived 2 weeks this week. And it was just, you know, being aware during all of those additional hours.
Cool. I'm going to throw this one out, so you don't all have to answer this one, but somebody's asked about the fact that their partner's still drinking. And when they offer to help because they feel they've got some knowledge that would be useful, they're being told that, well, you don't drink, so you're on a moral high ground. I think partners drinking is a really difficult situation. Who's got a great top tip to dealing with that?
Can I share my slightly controversial top tip, which is, don't offer to help them. You got to the point that you decided to change all by yourself. You know, not because anyone else was telling you, or you know, with the best will in the world, you're going to come across as if you're nagging. You know, that's just the dynamics of being in a relationship. If something about your partner which is irritating, or that you want to change, I don't know how you have that conversation without it looking like you're putting pressure on them. But you got to the starting point just by yourself, and actually your example of living your life well may be a motivator for them to change. It may not be, but it might be. And I wonder whether that's a better way than actually trying to have the conversation with them about their behavior at all. If you make the conversation about you and what's working for you and what you want and what makes you happy and what makes you fulfilled, that I wonder whether that's a better way to start a conversation. I wonder what anyone else thinks.
Anyone else?
I think you read my mind from across the ocean, Drew. That is something for me that is, it's hard because we want our loved ones to make this change, especially when we've gone through it and know how good it feels. And, you know, it's one thing, and I've seen this repeatedly in our programs where one member, I can tell a quick story. There was a lady in one of our programs, it's a 3-month program. This was like the very first question she asked me. She's like, I've been working on this for a while. My husband refuses to. And, you know, I gave her a very similar answer, Drew. I'm like, you can't make someone want to do this. But the best thing you can do is be that example and have them go, wait a minute. She's getting up earlier. She seems happier. And that is exactly what happened. And he actually came on the last call of our entire 3 months. And we talked about that. And I see that over and over, that it's the pushing that, or pushing that comes from a good place of wanting to help, that ends up very often pushing people away. But living as just an awesome example is, you become a magnet for people who want to make that change.
Yeah, I mean, I used to be in a relationship like this, and I realized that if I even made the slightest comment about my partner's drinking, it could cause an explosion, because it was like, well, you know, and all of that, and it was very much that thing where I just had to be happier and more together and more lovely and more excited about life and more of everything, so that it seemed more attractive. That's it. It was just about making a sober or a more sober life, because obviously there's a lot of people moderating rather than just giving up like I did. But it's, I suppose, just making it seem more attractive than the other life. And I think that's all that you can do. I mean, I certainly know that before I was ready, if people had started, you know, saying to me, well, you know, have you thought of, I would have literally given them the 2 fingers and perhaps never spoken to them again. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think just sort of what's actually going on a lot of the time, whether it's partners or friends who are used to you drinking, it's holding up a mirror that can be very threatening. So I think just being aware of the fact that maybe someone's feeling a bit threatened by your choice not to drink, and, you know, the biggest kind of predictor often in success of behaviour change is belief in your ability, and a lot of people don't believe that they can change, so they're kind of scared of attempting that. So I think just maybe have it, you know, kind of understanding some of those mechanisms that are going on behind it, when using those to kind of inform your conversations in a kind of non-confrontational way. I think that ties in what everyone's said, really.
It would help if I unmuted myself. So, I mean, it is important if somebody's behaviours are impacting on you to be able to talk about that. And so I think, whilst not hectoring people, the fact that somebody's behaviour is having an impact on you is really good to talk about. There's another question here, which is, are there any thoughts about psychotherapy as part of a process to help stop and going back to drinking? I often think there's probably not just one answer and you need to have lots of things, but has anyone got any experience or knowledge of that?
Yes.
Yeah. Good. Yeah, sure. Well, I'll take all the help I can get, quite frankly. And I think that's one of the absolute gifts of being sober, is being able to ask for help and talk honestly about what's going on for you. I think if you think you can be 100% honest with a therapist, which often people who have a bit of an issue with drink find it hard to be honest, but if you think you can be 100% honest and you're willing to accept suggestions and all of that, then psychotherapy might help you. There's lots of different modalities of therapy that could help you, but you have to bring your whole self to it. Otherwise, just sitting there magically not telling the whole story never helped me. So that would be my caveat with that. But yeah, I've had bucket loads of therapy and it's been fantastic.
James?
Yeah, so as I kind of alluded to earlier, I didn't drink for most of my 20s, and during that period I sort of became involved in the alcohol harm reduction field. But also in my late 20s I did do a lot of psychotherapy, and I think it was really during that process that the way I kind of see it is that, you know, difficult stuff from my childhood was kind of internalized, and alcohol was a way of venting that. And even though I kind of went through a process of kind of getting sober, or whatever you want to call it, I still carried a lot of that stuff. I was still I think, at risk of kind of losing my temper or, venting or projecting stuff. And it was through a process of psychotherapy where I feel like I was able to come to terms with and accept and kind of let go some of the stuff that I think really drove my past destructive drinking. So for me, that was a huge part of it. I'm always careful to caveat that as a kind of moderate drinker, that the benefits of it are I fetishized whilst I was sober, that I really thought I was still missing out on this really great thing. But if you do kind of moderate drinking properly, which means to me not drinking very much, it's not actually that great. So I'm always kind of careful to try and caveat that, and that sobriety or not drinking at all is actually a lot easier in almost always, because you know exactly where the line is. But for me, fundamentally, to go back to the question, it was therapy that allowed me to resolve a lot of issues that I think took away what the kind of drive was behind my self-destructive drinking. But without doubt, 8 years of not drinking definitely helped kind of reset or kind of eliminate some of those kind of self-destructive kind of neuron pathways that had been kind of laid down and over embedded. So again, it's never going to be, I don't think, all of the solution, but for some people I think it can play a really important role.
I mean, another way to look at that is there's a question about the fact that we often hold on to a lot of guilt around our behaviour when we've been drinking in the past, and part of it is it's hard to let go of that. I still sometimes, that from nowhere come great thoughts around some of the real dickhead things that I did when I was drinking. Millie, how do you have lots of guilt held on to your drinking time, or have you managed to let that go?
It's a bit of a mixture, actually. I do. I get like you. Sometimes I get waves, and I'm like, oh. One thing that has actually helped me, which I think is quite a practical thing, is actually looking into like a lot of the like neuroscience around it. So because I think a lot of us think, oh God, that was like the kind of like horrible part of me that came out and did those things. And when you kind of all like look into it, like it wasn't you at all. So like kind of separating that has really helped me to sort of like not feel guilty about that. But then I've also like made amends with people. The last 2 years has been like me really trying to just like make up that behavior to people, which has been really helpful for me. And some of my friends are like, okay, you've done enough now. But I'm like, no, I just want to like make it up and like feel better about that. So doing those things, and then like giving back to the community and like helping other people with their alcohol-free journey, like those kinds of things, I feel like I'm kind of putting my good karma into the world to alleviate all the bad karma that I put in through the terrible things I did drinking.
What about you, Scott? What do you think around all of that holding on to guilt?
It's a big one, and I think a lot of people hold on to it for a long time. I like to do an exercise with people once they've kind of learned and gotten up on gotten their sober legs, so to speak. This tends to come up, as they're healing, and one of the tactics that I'll use with them is I'll actually have them write a forgiveness letter to themselves. And this sounds so corny on the face of it. Like the first time I heard this, I'm like, oh, come on. But it's really amazing because what someone is able to do with this, and this is all predicated, by the way, on something I like to say all the time, that like you are addicted to alcohol. That's not your fault, but it is your responsibility, right? Once you take 100% ownership of it, that means all of this, you own all of it. And so part of this process is being able to look back at that behavior and forgive yourself, right? Other people, you can certainly, like, making amends. I love that, Millie, doing that and, trying to make it up to people is really helpful, but that's a good thing, but it's not going to get you all the way there unless you let go of it yourself. And so this process of letting go of it is really simple. The letter really kind of starts with, all right, here are all the things, right? These are the things that I've done that I'm ashamed with. These are the things that I've done that I've been holding on to, that I've been clinging on to. And then moving into the next section of the letter, it's about writing out the stuff that you've learned about alcohol, right? Why is it that you started acting differently? What are all of these different triggers? And for people that have gone through, any program really, but particularly this Naked Mind, we spend a lot of time working on those beliefs that they held and the triggers that were hard for them and what that meant for them. And so they can lay out the entire story and they can say, I did these things that I'm ashamed of. Here's why I've figured out that I've done these things. And here's what I've learned. And here's what I've worked on. And then the letter ends with saying, like, I'm letting these things go. I'm going to forgive myself. And it's amazing when you put it all down on paper at once in this format, it can feel incredibly freeing. But it is absolutely something that a lot of people do carry around with them is the guilt for this, you know, whatever situations arose for them.
Drew, it's also worth saying that in the program, there's stuff written about, you know, you could feel guilty about it, but you can't stop yourself. You shouldn't let that stop you moving on and doing something about it. And if you want to make sure the next stage of your life is different to what it was, then beginning to accept that was in the past, but you now have control over the future. Some of the decision-based stuff in the program, Drew, that you've written.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing which I just add to all of that is that guilt can be a comfortable place to be. It's a shitty place to be, but it can be a place that you get stuck because it's easier to sit feeling sorry for yourself about the things that you've done than to act differently. I remember a conversation I had years ago with somebody where I behaved really badly, and they said, I don't need you to be sorry, I need you to act differently. And it's really easy to get caught in a cycle of fucking up and saying sorry and doing that repeatedly and never actually changing. And actually owning what's going on can orient you forwards to say, actually, I'm going to do something different. I'm gonna make a decision from now. I can't change what's happened. My sister is a fount of wisdom, and one of the things that she says to me whenever I've had moments of complaining about, you know, my history and I wish things hadn't happened, and she goes, you know, we don't have an alternative version of your life where any of those things that you wanted are true. Okay, so you have to start from where you are right now and then make the best of it and then make positive decisions from there. So some of the guilt is actually about going, I'm not going to be held back by the patterns of behavior and the habits and the routines that have gotten me to this stage. I'm going to draw a line in the sand and I'm going to face forward and I'm going to decide from today, things are going to be different. And this is the practical, simple things which I'm going to do day to day to begin to change. And that is a really powerful moment, I think, for people. It can be really transformational.
There's another really quite good question here, which is about, is it important to give yourself a label or a definition? Like, are you a problem drinker or an alcoholic? Do any of you have an identity that you have got that is useful to you? Or do you think that's not useful? I have some very strong views on this, so I might not answer a question, but I'm really interested to hear what the rest of the panel think.
Yeah, I've consistently from the beginning, well, actually not quite from the beginning. I originally sought help because I knew I needed to stop taking certain drugs, but certainly not all drugs. And I certainly didn't think that I had a problem with alcohol. And so a friend very kindly said to me, well, if it's not a problem, then stop. And I was like, oh. And I do find, I find just for me that labeling myself an alcoholic and labeling myself a drug addict helps me to do all the things that I do that have kept me clean and sober all this time and have a super happy, healthy life, and be a great mom and like all of those things. And so I find that by owning the problem, it means that I step into the solution. If I didn't, I mean, I'm sure there's other ways, other labels I could give it, but you know, as Shakespeare said, you know, what's in a name? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet. It really doesn't matter. Call it whatever you want. It doesn't work for me, that old way, and this way does work. And so by reminding myself of that thing, I step into the solution. And somebody's asking what drugs did I want to stop at the time. Probably, since you asked, cocaine and ecstasy. I didn't want to stop weed, and I probably didn't really want to stop the ecstasy, to be honest, if I could get away with it. Yeah, I certainly didn't want to stop drinking, but I came to realize that for me, it was just kind of like changing rooms on the Titanic. Like the ship still went down. It didn't really matter what substance I put in. It still crushed my soul and I still couldn't stop. even when I thought I was only going to have 1 or 2 or 3 or something, rather than 4 days of it. That's just how I'm built. So originally I just wanted to stop those, and like, shockingly, I don't even have caffeine or sugar these days. Yeah, I mean,
move along, Harriet, without the sugar and the caffeine. Come on now.
I tell you what, it took me. I've been on and off caffeine the whole time, but sugar, it took me well over, I think, about it took me about 12 years to even contemplate sugar. So there you go.
Who else has got an identity that they might want to talk about?
Well, yeah, I suppose, I mean, the reason I get really excited about kind of the labels and definitions debate was because my sort of PhD studies, I kind of did experiments manipulating, that's how we kind of term it in psychology, changing people's beliefs about labels and identities. And, you know, I've always been fascinated by the alcoholic identity. I mean, I did go to AA for a bit, you know, when I was in that kind of process I'd actually stopped drinking and I started to go. And I found the peer support amazing. You know, it was the first place that I'd ever been where I was in a room full of people who were really supportive of what I was doing, when I'd been used to my mates going, come on, what are you doing? Like, you know, relax, you don't have a problem, etc. But I never felt, even though in meetings I had self-identified as an alcoholic, I never felt comfortable doing so. And then subsequently from then, I went on and researched, and obviously there's a whole controversy around the kind of disease model of addiction that AA aligns with. And, you know, my personal view is it's a disease in a metaphorical sense, if you want to see it that way. And that's part of the self-labeling. But for a lot of people, there's a big stigma, and one of my favourite bits of research is a paper by Hill and Lee Ming called "Reconstructing the Alcoholic Identity," and it's really about how some people really struggle to adopt that identity because it carries so much stigma. And, you know, it's a real sign of strength and determination if you can adopt that identity. But for a lot of people, that, you know, that won't always work. And, you know, alcohol problems are one of the most stigmatizing problems you can have, even more so than mental health or even some drug problems. So there's this real false divide amongst, or society at whole likes to construct this false divide between alcoholics and everyone else, whereas, you know, sort of in public health terms, there are lots of people with alcohol problems that maybe don't fit the classic stereotype of rock bottom, homeless, drinking in the morning, etc. So, you know,
I'm going to stop you there before Scott comes in, because I know that Millie might have to go in a minute because it's a Sober Girl Society quiz tonight, I think. So, Millie, how do you identify yourself?
I identify as sober, and I think the original question is like, is it important to give yourself a label? And I think it is important if you think it's important. Like, I don't think you need to worry about what anyone else thinks. Personally, when I got sober, I didn't call myself an alcoholic because it just didn't feel right to me. And that, again, is because of this kind of like stereotypical idea and the stigma. And as like a blackout binge drinker, I kind of thought, well, if I say that, then, you know, people will laugh at me and be like, no, you're not. So I just wanted to take this like sober, and it was kind of like, oh, do I just say I don't drink? But for me, sober kind of was more about when people asked me if they were like, oh, do you want a drink? I could say, no, thanks, I'm sober. So having that label for me was important, but it doesn't matter what label you take, just the one that works for you, in my personal opinion.
And just to let you know, if Millie goes, it's not because she hates you all, it's because she's got another appointment.
It's a family quiz, so I'll tell them I'm going to be late. It's fine.
All right. Scott.
So I did not use the label alcoholic. And I actually, I am not a big fan of the term, to be honest with you. And I think that the implication that there's alcoholics and normal people, I see so many people suffering with that, and suffering like, man, if I say I have a problem with alcohol, then I'm this alcoholic. And like we've all talked about, this stigma is really it's not a nice thing to have attached to you. And people do feel some shame around that. You know, and this is also why, you know, the term alcoholic, it's not even really a medical term anymore. We've really shifted to the alcohol use disorder spectrum. And the other thing that the other thing that I think trips me up with that term is this idea that there are this group of people who are alcoholics and this group of people who aren't. And we all know plenty of people who don't call themselves an alcoholic yet are in this other group. Based on my understanding of the science and kind of how this works and the psychology of it, I'm fairly convinced that anyone given enough time and enough booze will become an alcoholic. So this idea that we're somehow different, that really, really rubbed me the wrong way. And I actually didn't choose to give myself a label. At This Naked Mind, we call it alcohol free. We actually don't use the word alcoholic. But like when people ask me if I want to drink, I say, no, I don't. and that was it for me. I don't know if I would have, at the time, if I would have adopted the label alcohol free, but I just say I don't drink. But I was very much not into being called an alcoholic or calling myself an alcoholic, just for a lot of those reasons.
Yeah, and it's I'm an alcohol-free mindful drinker. Mindful drinker is helpful for us in Club Soda because we're trying to do some systems change in the UK. And the mindful drinking community is far bigger than just one set of people. So anyone who's pregnant right now is a mindful drinker. Anyone who's driving tonight, a mindful drinker. Anyone who's moderating or taking a break is a mindful drinker. That means that the marketplace is far bigger than just those of us who are alcohol free, which means I can make sure change happens by saying this is about 11 million people, not just about 4 million. And so a bit like I'm a bisexual queer as well. I'm part of a queer community, but I'm a specific part of it. So I think you can have an identity within a bigger grouping as well. And I think the more that we all realize what brings us together as people who might not drink or have never drunk, the more we'll find support and the things that we need in society, because society does, try and make us drink all the time. And so together we can resist that a lot more. So cool. Okay, I've got a really interesting last question, which it is a good one, which is, after all of this time, and you've all got different stories and journeys, do you still think about drinking? Do those calls come back to you? And what do you do if they do? Millie, come on. You must be around booze all of the time as a party girl at 26.
Yeah, I don't think I ever stop. It's hard. I don't ever stop thinking about drinking, because now that I do what I do, I'm constantly talking about drinking and talking about sobriety. So I don't think my mind ever goes off it. There's not a day where I don't think about either sobriety or drinking. But in terms of actually thinking about my drinking, I just definitely don't think about it as much anymore. And I think that is because I've armed myself with all this knowledge that, knowledge is power. The more you know about alcohol and the more you know about the benefits of sobriety, and the longer you live it, the less you want to go back to what it was before, I think. So yeah, there's not a day where I don't think about it. And especially at the moment, everyone's, you can't swipe through your Instagram feed without seeing an isolation wine meme, which I think is quite triggering for a lot of people. But in terms of, my own drinking, I think the longer it's gone on, the less those cravings definitely come.
Anyone else?
I can speak to that too. So I, just like Millie, because of what I do for my job, I cannot say I don't think about alcohol. I actually think about alcohol all the time, but not for my own consumption. So when I run into stressful situations or difficult things, it's been a while. I'm coming up on 4 years alcohol free, and it's probably been a couple of years since I've had the thought of oh man, I'm going to go get a drink because of something, in front of me. And it is a sort of thing, just as time goes on. And I think James kind of talked about this with the neural pathways and rewiring how we respond to certain things in our environment. I went through a phase where I was really angry about it. I went through a phase where I was sad for people who were talking about it. And during those times would have those cravings, would have those ideas. But at this point now, no, it's just not for me. It's just not, I like to say I drink exactly as much as I want to, which is nothing. And that's it. It just doesn't come up for me.
I'm assuming, Harriet, that your thoughts of alcohol have been replaced by thoughts of sugar anyway, right?
No, not at all. No, in fact, I occasionally have a drinking dream. I had a really vivid one 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I woke up in quite a panic because it was just, you know, even after all these years, I could really taste it. But other than that, it really, I literally can't remember the last time I seriously thought about it. There's been plenty of times when the thought has flitted across, and then I'm just like, well, that's insane, because I know how catastrophic it was for me. And as you know, I've come through cancer recently. I was badly injured in a car accident 4 years ago. I went through a really difficult divorce in 2012, 2013. And at no point during any of those things did I ever think drinking is going to make this easier for me. However, I did get very cross with my cancer diagnosis, because I was like, I've been living off green smoothies and not eating sugar for years now. And so I did start, I had a whole weekend where I ate loads of brownies and pizzas, and I felt really ill. And then I decided to be what I suppose a moderate sugar consumer. And my tagline was, I'm more flexible. But eventually it did actually spiral totally out of control. And then I lovingly decided to release it a couple of months ago. So, yeah.
It's interesting. I get drinking dreams, and I also dream that I'm getting Club Soda members drunk. Those are the worst ones. I'm like, oh, I'm getting people I'm meant to be helping drunk. That's really weird.
Yeah.
And I do also get fleeting thoughts, normally in small, intimate dinner occasions about a drink. And I think for me, it is just a thought. It's not an order. And so I recognize it for what it is, and then it's gone. It's like, wow, where did that come from? But I don't feel I need to act on it.
Well, sometimes it can be a bit of a red flag, can't it? You can go, oh, hang on a minute. Am I struggling to feel I fit in here? Am I worried what other people think? Am I angry? Am I tired? There can be certain triggers, and we all know, or we'll come to know what our triggers are, and just that fleeting thought, you can go, what's going on? And then you can give yourself what you actually need, right?
Yeah, James, and Drew probably got to answer on this as well. But if you're moderating your drinking, aren't you thinking about alcohol more? And isn't that just really tiring? Or how and have you got rules that you keep to in order to make all of that work? Oh, it sounds exhausting to me already.
Yeah, this is such an interesting question, and it's something I think about a lot. But I think the reason, and obviously when I started drinking again after having not drunk for 8 years, it was almost like an experiment that I really wanted to do, and I was super worried about it, and a lot of people I knew were really worried about it. But I was very clear at starting that if I met any of these kind of criteria, which I said were indications of an alcohol problem, I would stop again. And I was also happy that I would be happy stopping again, because I knew that I could be happy as a kind of sober person. But yeah, as someone that does drink and sees myself as a mindful drinker in some senses, that there do have to be clear rules about it. I'd always have at least 3 alcohol-free days a week, preferably more. I would, never drink more than 6 as a very maximum number of units in a day. But yeah, there is still the perpetual thing about when you have a drink and there is this kind of biochemical reaction going on that interplays, then you do have to question what's the effect on that on your inhibitions and your subsequent thought processes. But the ultimate test for me is that I know that when I have a stressful period, I actually don't have that self-destructive tendency. I am less likely to drink rather than more likely to drink, as it would have been in the past. So that's the measure for me. I don't know if I've really answered the question, but it's complicated.
No, it's useful, and you're probably one of the only people I know who can count units. So it's that's about 3 beers, isn't it? Something like that. So rather than 6 drinks. So, yeah. But anyway, Drew, you're a moderate drinker.
Yeah, so for me, my moderation has come actually through very gradually cutting down over time. Since having started that, James may know, if you are cutting down your drinking, your tolerance for alcohol goes down, so then you need less. And actually that's been a constant process for me of paying attention as the amount of drinking that I've been doing has gone down. I used to say I was okay with 2 pints, and now I say 1. 2 pints is too much now, because my alcohol consumption has been going down, and I have long periods of alcohol free as well. The big switch for me that's happened in the last year really kind of, and I can't identify exactly when it happened, but I know that I think about this subject really differently now, is when I suddenly realized that I was uncomfortable using the language of cutting down, because for me it described drinking alcohol as the norm rather than not drinking alcohol as the norm. You know, it suggested that there was an amount of alcohol that I should be drinking, and that anything less than that was cutting down. So now I am much more conscious and deliberate about those occasions and those types of drinks where I think drinking alcohol is going to add some value, and I can do that in a way which supports me to live well. And if it doesn't meet those criteria, I just won't do it. So for me, I made a category decision. I don't drink beer with alcohol in it. The overwhelming majority of my beer drinking is alcohol free. And that has just eliminated an entire category of decision making for me. I really love going to the pub. I'm looking forward to going back to the pub and ordering an alcohol free beer, because that's what I do in the pub now, you know, so that really works for me. And then I save alcohol for those moments or occasions where I think it's going to add value. One of our colleagues, Laura, in terms of rules, one of the ones which I really like from her is that she won't drink if she's feeling a certain mood. So if she's lonely or sad or angry or any of those things where she would have drunk as a coping mechanism before, she notices the mood and then chooses another type of behavior. And I think that's a really helpful thing as well, particularly if you're somebody who's moderating and has been somebody who drank to cope with big emotions, to rule it out as a coping mechanism and say, I'm going to find other things, and then think about where drinking is going to add value to your life.
Thank you. I'm actually going to wrap this up here so Millie can go to the family quiz and everyone can go. Can I just thank you all for your time? Most importantly, what you have here is a group of people who are really happy with the decision they've made around changing their drinking, happy that the life it's given them, and happy that the life it's going to give them in the future. And so if there's anything I can leave you with, is that there's nothing to be frightened about change in this space. And certainly changing your drinking isn't going to do you any harm. So I'm hoping other people will watch this webinar afterwards. As I promised, here is my Poached Egg and Marmite Swim Club t-shirt for those of those who were on the webinar this morning about the things that make me happy. Thank you everybody here, and good night.
Thanks so
I
much.
really enjoyed that.
Bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye. Well, I've got to stop something.